Chapter 1. A Summons to Tragedy. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered in a crisp ivory envelope sealed with deep red wax. Captain Arthur Hastings turned it over curiously before setting it on the breakfast table, where Hercule, Poirot sat, delicately cutting his toast into precise squares. "An invitation, mon ami?" Poirot inquired, eyeing the envelope with interest. Hastings nodded. "From Lord Henry Marchington. He's hosting a grand weekend at Marchington Hall. A rather exclusive affair, I imagine." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And what, pray, makes you say that?" Hastings tapped the heavy cardstock. "The wording is formal, almost archaic. A gathering of esteemed guests in the spirit of camaraderie and mirth." He chuckled. "Might as well say, a grand assembly of rich boors." Poirot's fingers danced over the invitation as he examined it closely. His gaze lingered. "At the bottom. Curious," he murmured. "What is?" Poirot lifted the card, pointing to a single red smudge beneath Lord Marchington's signature. "A bloodstain, Hastings." Hastings frowned. "Surely ink?" Poirot's sharp eyes met his. "No, this is blood." A chill crept over Hastings. He had seen enough of Poirot's deductions to know that the little Belgian did not speak lightly. Poirot set the card down, with precision. "Marchington Hall, you say? Then we shall go, Hastings. I have a feeling this exclusive affair may prove most illuminating." Chapter 2. Marchington Hall and its guests, the countryside of Derbyshire, unfolded in endless, rolling green as the train rattled its way toward the village of Marchington on the Hill. Poirot sat opposite Captain Hastings in their first-class compartment, impeccably dressed as always, his attire a study in fastidiousness. His pocket-square was precisely folded, and his patent leather shoes gleamed as if freshly polished. Hastings, meanwhile, gazed out at the pastoral scenery with the easy satisfaction of a man who relished country estates, horse-riding, and the occasional fine brandy by a roaring fire. "Marchington Hall," Hastings mused, tapping a finger on the train's polished wooden armrest. "I know the name. Old family, been around for centuries. Lord Henry inherited the estate about 10 years ago, after his elder brother's passing, rather sudden, I recall. Unmarried, but known for throwing extravagant weekends. Some say he's squandered a fair bit of the family fortune, keeping up appearances." Poirot made a non-committal noise, adjusting the crease in his trousers. "And yet, mon ami, a man who hosts many may also hide much. I am most intrigued by the stain upon our invitation." "Oh, that? Surely nothing more than an accident," Hastings said lightly. "A cut finger, a dropped pen." Poirot merely lifted a brow. Hastings sighed. "Well, I suppose we shall find out soon enough." The train slowed as they reached Marchington on the Hill, the small station enveloped in mist. A liveried chauffeur awaited them by a gleaming black Rolls-Royce, holding a sign that read, "Monsieur Poirot and guest." "Efficient," Poirot murmured approvingly as they stepped into the car. Marchington Hall. The estate emerged through the morning fog, an imposing Jacobean mansion of grey stone, with ivy clinging to its high walls and gabled windows staring out like solemn eyes. The great iron gates parted as their car approached, crunching up the long gravel drive. "Impressive," Hastings remarked as they pulled to a stop. "Classic English grandeur." Poirot, however, tilted his head. "Grandeur, yes, But observe, Hastings, the house is well maintained, yet there is something just a little faded, no? As if time has begun to outpace its master. Hastings glanced up. True, there was no immediate disrepair, but he noticed certain details. A balcony railing slightly rusted, stonework darkened with age, windows that might once have gleamed now dull in the weak light. A butler, tall and stiff-backed, greeted them at the door. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. Welcome to Marchington Hall. I am Gibson." He led them through a vast entrance hall, its oak-panelled walls adorned with portraits of past Marchingtons, their expressions frozen in aristocratic severity. At the far end of the hall, a woman in her early 50s approached with the bearing of someone who had once been striking, but now wore her beauty like a memory. She had auburn hair pinned tightly, a dress of deep green velvet, and keen, assessing eyes. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she said, offering a hand. "I am Lady Margaret Marchington, Henry's cousin. He will be down shortly, but allow me to introduce you to some of the guests." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is an honour, madam." The guests of Marchington Hall. The drawing-room was a grand space with high ceilings, dark mahogany furnishings, and an atmosphere thick with unspoken tensions. Poirot, ever observant, took stock of the assembled guests. Sir Benedict Howard, a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair, a hawk-like profile, and an air of calculated detachment. "Investor," Lady Margaret whispered to Poirot. "Once quite powerful, though whispers say he's made some disastrous financial choices of late." Cecilia Marchington, Lord Henry's niece, barely 20, with delicate features and a nervous energy. Her pale hands twisted in her lap. "She is the last of the Marchington line after Henry," Lady Margaret said softly. "Lost her mother young, a sweet girl, but terribly naive." Dr. Lionel Bertram, a heavy-set man with a bristly moustache and a no-nonsense demeanour. Our local physician, very discreet. Julian Forsyth, a playwright, lean and elegant, with an air of amused detachment. A friend of Henry's, Lady Margaret noted, loves to stir the pot. Vivian Carlyle, a striking woman in her late 30s with piercing blue eyes and a confident air. Former actress, Margaret murmured, rumoured to have once been involved. With Henry, Edgar Pym, Lord Henry's solicitor, thin, anxious, and perpetually adjusting his spectacles. As Hastings made polite conversation, Poirot merely observed. Every glance, every fidget, every carefully chosen word or silence was a piece of a puzzle. Finally, the host arrived. Lord Henry Marchington strode in, a man in his mid-50s, still handsome, but with the slight puffiness of a man who had lived well, and perhaps a bit too indulgently. His blue eyes sparkled with charm, but something in his expression seemed restless. "Ah, Poirot! Delighted to have you," he boomed, shaking hands warmly. "You are quite the celebrity, you know." Poirot inclined his head. "I am most curious, Lord Marchington, as to the nature of your invitation." Marchington hesitated just a fraction of a second before laughing. "Well, my dear fellow, I do throw rather splendid gatherings, don't I? Thought you might enjoy a weekend among good company." His gaze flickered toward Vivian Carlyle, who arched a single brow in response. Hastings, sensing a change in atmosphere, cleared his throat. "Lovely house, Marchington. Your family must be proud of it." A shadow crossed Marchington's face. Yes, though houses, like legacies, can be burdens as much as blessings. Poirot did not miss the glance exchanged between Marchington and his solicitor, Edgar Pym. A glance of shared knowledge, or of unease. An ominous turn dinner was a grand affair, but beneath the polished silverware and candle-lit warmth, Poirot sensed tension. Conversations, though lively, had undercurrents. Marchington himself seemed at times jovial, at times distracted. At one point, Julian Forsyth, the playwright, leaned in toward Vivienne. "Rumour has it, Henry's been receiving rather unpleasant letters of late." Vivienne smirked. "Rumours are rarely precise, Julian." "Ah, but the truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it?" Poirot caught the way Marchington's jaw tightened. Then, as the clock struck 11 and guests retired to their rooms, a scream shattered the air. Poirot and Hastings rushed toward sound. Lady Margaret stood at the entrance of the study, her hand clutched at her throat. Inside, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay Lord Henry Marchington, dead. And on the desk beside him, an invitation identical to Poirot's, stained with blood. Chapter 3. The First Clues and Contradictions. A heavy silence fell upon Marchington Hall as the lifeless body of Lord Henry Marchington lay sprawled across the ornate Persian rug in his study. His eyes were open, glassy, staring up at the grand chandelier overhead. A faint trail of blood trickled from the corner of his lips, staining the silk collar of his dinner jacket. Poirot, ever meticulous, did not rush forward. Instead, he stood at the threshold, his keen eyes sweeping across the room. Captain Hastings, however, took a sharp intake of breath. "My God, Poirot! He's been murdered!" Poirot merely inclined his head. "Oui, mon ami. And now begins the delicate work of understanding how and why." Lady Margaret, still trembling, clutched at the doorway. I came to check on Henry after dinner. He had excused himself early, saying he was tired. When I knocked, there was no answer. The door was unlocked, so I pushed it open, and oh, mon Dieu!" Poirot turned to her, his gaze gentle but probing. "Calm yourself, Lady Margaret. Tell me, at what time did you last see Lord Marchington alive?" She swallowed hard. "It must have been around 10:30. He was in the drawing-room, but seemed distracted." Poirot nodded and took a step forward, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He took in every detail. The body, Lord Marchington lay on his back, his arms splayed out. His dinner jacket was slightly askew, as if someone had gripped him roughly. A single small wound, just above the collarbone, glistened with dark blood. The desk. Papers were neatly stacked, except for one. A single ivory invitation, identical to the one Poirot had received. A fresh bloodstain marked the bottom edge. The fireplace. The embers still glowed faintly. Someone had been in the room recently. A smashed glass. Near the desk, a crystal tumbler lay shattered, its contents spilled. Whiskey, by the scent of it. Poirot bent low, his fingers hovering just above Lord Marchington's sleeve. "Hastings, observe. The man has not been dead long. The body is still warm." Dr. Lionel Bertram, the local physician who had been among the guests, stepped forward, his moustache twitching. "I can confirm that, Monsieur Poirot. I would estimate he died within the last hour. likely just before Lady Margaret found him. Poirot nodded. And the cause of death? The doctor knelt, examining the wound. A single puncture wound, not deep, but precisely placed, straight into the subclavian artery. A quiet, efficient kill. Poirot's brows lifted. An interesting method, n'est-ce pas? This was not a frenzied attack, nor a struggle. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Hastings frowned. A professional killer? Poirot shook his head. Not necessarily, but certainly someone with knowledge of both anatomy and discretion. A new voice cut through the room. This is a damned outrage. The group turned as Sir Benedict Howard, the distinguished investor, strode in, his face dark with anger. Murder, here, in this house? I demand this be dealt with at once. Poirot turned, to him his tone cool. And you, Sir Benedict, where were you at the time of the murder? Sir Benedict's jaw tightened. I was in the library with Miss Carlyle. He gestured to Vivian Carlyle, the former actress, who stood nearby with an unreadable expression. Poirot's gaze flickered between them, noting their body language. Vivienne met his eyes steadily, though her fingers idly twisted the emerald ring on her hand. Very well, Poirot murmured. I shall speak to each of you in turn. For now, let us secure the scene. The examination of the room. Poirot knelt beside the desk, carefully lifting the blood-stained invitation. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Odd, isn't it? Why would there be blood on an invitation? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the placement of the stain. It is not merely a careless drop, mon ami. The blood is smeared as though someone touched it with a stained finger. He turned his attention to the fireplace. The embers glowed softly, but something had been burned recently. Poirot retrieved a small poker and carefully shifted the ashes. A fragment of blackened paper emerged. Poirot lifted it with the delicacy of a surgeon. Though much of it was burned away, one corner remained intact. A single word was visible: betrayal. Hastings exhaled. Good Lord! Poirot placed the fragment into a small envelope. A message, perhaps, a note that Lord Marchington wished to destroy. His gaze travelled back to the broken whisky glass. He touched the spilled liquid with his fingertip, bringing it close to his nose. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Poirot stood. Come, Hastings, it is time to ask some questions. The first round of interviews. Poirot and Hastings moved to the drawing-room, where the guests were now assembled, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. Poirot chose to speak first with Cecilia Marchington, the young niece of the deceased. She sat apart from the others, her pale hands clasped tightly. Miss Marchington, Poirot said gently, when did you last see your uncle? Her lips trembled. At dinner. He seemed not himself, jumpy almost. Did he say anything unusual? She hesitated. He said, soon it will all be over. Poirot's gaze sharpened. An odd choice of words, mademoiselle. She nodded. I asked him what he meant, but he only smiled and said I was too young to worry. Poirot glanced at Hastings before continuing. And after dinner? I went to my room. I didn't hear anything until Lady Margaret screamed. Poirot watched her for a moment longer, then turned to Julian Forsyth, the playwright. Monsieur Forsyth, where were you?" Julian smirked. "In the smoking room, drinking brandy and listening to Sir Benedict pontificate about the stock market." Sir Benedict shot him a glare. Poirot continued. "Did you see Lord Marchington after dinner?" "No," Julian replied, "though I did hear his study door shut around 10:15. Poirot's moustache twitched. "You are sure of the time?" "I was checking my watch." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Vivian Carlyle. "Mademoiselle, you were in the library with Sir Benedict?" Vivian tilted her head. "Indeed, discussing Shakespeare. Or rather, I was discussing. Sir Benedict was pretending to listen." Poirot allowed a small smile before fixing her with a direct look. "Did you leave the library at any point?" Vivienne's gaze flickered just for a second. "No." Poirot filed that away. Finally, he turned to Edgar Pym, the solicitor. "Monsieur Pym, as Lord Marchington's solicitor, you may know, had he made recent changes to his will?" Edgar Pym blanched. I am not at liberty to discuss." Poirot's voice remained soft, yet unyielding. "A man is dead, Monsieur Pym. You are very much at liberty." Pym hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he said, "Yes, he called me last week. He said he wished to make urgent amendments, but we hadn't finalized them yet." Poirot leaned forward. "And tell me, monsieur, who stood to benefit from these changes?" Pym swallowed hard. I don't know for certain, but I believe he intended to disinherit someone." A hush fell over the room. Poirot straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "Then, mes amis, I believe we have our first true motive." Chapter 4. Shadows of Deception. The drawing-room of Marchington Hall had grown, silent, the weight of suspicion pressing down on its occupants. Poirot, ever composed, let his gaze linger over each person in turn, studying their expressions as if he could read their very souls. Some avoided his eyes, others met his gaze with defiance. But in every face there was something: fear, guilt, curiosity. Poirot had often said that the greatest clues were not found in the evidence, but in the minds of the people themselves. At last he spoke. "Mes amis, a man does not die without cause. And yet we find ourselves with a crime that is both intimate and deliberate. Tell me, what would compel someone to murder Lord Marchington?" Silence. Then Sir Benedict Howard scoffed. "He was a stubborn old man, Poirot. A wealthy one. There's no shortage of people who would want him out of the way." Poirot lifted an eyebrow. "Indeed, but which of those people was willing to take that final step?" Lady Margaret, still pale and shaken, set down her untouched glass of brandy. "Surely you're not suggesting that one of us, one of his guests, is responsible?" Poirot spread his hands. "But of course, madam. Someone within this house committed this crime. The door was unlocked, yes, but no sign of forced entry. A stranger entering unnoticed. Très improbable." Vivian Carlyle, lounging on a velvet chaise, tapped a slender finger against her lips. "Then, if it was one of us, Poirot, tell me, what is your theory? You must have one already." Poirot smiled just slightly. "A theory, mademoiselle? No, not yet. But I have questions. And it is in the answering of these questions that the truth shall be revealed." He turned. addressing the room at large. "There are many peculiarities to consider, mes amis. First, Lord Marchington was murdered in his study. It is a room that he seldom allowed others to enter, and yet tonight someone was with him. Who? No answer. Second," Poirot continued, "there is the blood-stained invitation. Why, in all this room, was that single paper marked with blood? Did Lord Marchington grasp it in his final moments? Was it planted to mislead us? Again, silence. Third, we have the burned document in the fireplace. Only a fragment remains. It bears the word betrayal. A message from the killer? Or something Lord Marchington himself destroyed?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. Poirot noted every movement. "And finally, there is the matter of the disrupted will." His gaze landed squarely on Edgar Pym, the solicitor. "You say Lord Marchington intended to disinherit someone. Tell me, monsieur, was it one among us?" Pym hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing. I cannot say with certainty, but yes, I believe so." Poirot's voice remained calm. "And yet the new will had not been finalized. Meaning, in the eyes of the law, his original will is still valid. Tell me, Monsieur Pym, who inherits under that version?" Pym glanced around the room, as though searching for an escape. Finally, he exhaled. "Lady Margaret is his primary beneficiary. After her, his niece, Cecilia Marchington." All eyes turned to Lady Margaret and Cecilia. The former stiffened, her face unreadable. The latter turned pale. Poirot nodded. "Interesting. But before we draw conclusions, let us consider what else remains unknown. Lady Margaret, did your husband seem anxious in the days before his death?" She took a breath before answering. "Yes, more than usual. He was on edge. He kept going, to his study at odd hours. I asked him about it, but he said it was private business." "Private business?" Poirot repeated. "Fascinating." He turned to Cecilia. "And you, mademoiselle? You were fond of your uncle, no?" "Yes," she answered softly. "He took me in after my parents died. He raised me. But he was planning to change his will," Poirot mused. "Had he spoken to you about it?" Her brows furrowed. "No, but we did argue recently." Hastings blinked. "Argue? About what?" Cecilia hesitated, then admitted, He disapproved of someone I was seeing." A charged silence filled the air. Poirot did not miss the way her gaze flickered towards Julian Forsyth. Julian smiled faintly. "Ah, the disreputable playwright," he murmured. "I suppose Lord Marchington thought Cecilia deserved someone more traditional." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And tell me, Monsieur Forsyth, where were you when Lord Marchington was killed?" Julian shrugged. "As I told, you in the smoking room, alone." A pause. "Sir Benedict was there as well." Poirot turned to Sir Benedict, who confirmed this with a curt nod. Poirot's gaze flicked across the room, searching, and then he asked very simply, "Who was the last person to see Lord Marchington alive?" A pause. Then, "I was." Voice came from Vivian Carlyle. All eyes snapped toward her. Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, you are certain?" She gave a slow nod. "I stepped into the corridor around 10:15. I saw him leave the drawing-room and head toward his study. Was he alone? A beat. Then, yes." Poirot let that answer settle. Then, with a sharp gleam in his eyes, he delivered his next question. "Then, mademoiselle, who was he speaking to?" Vivienne froze. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Finally, Vivienne swallowed. I don't know what you mean." Poirot tilted his head. "Mademoiselle, you say Lord Marchington was alone when he entered his study. But just minutes later, a witness, Julian Forsyth, heard a voice from inside. You were in the corridor. So tell me, mademoiselle, did you see anyone else enter?" Vivienne's lips parted. She glanced around, as though looking for someone to rescue her. Then, softly, "Yes." A ripple of shock passed through the guests. Poirot leaned forward. "Who?" Vivienne hesitated. "I don't know. I only saw a shadow. Someone slipped inside after Lord Marchington. I assumed it was just a servant." "A shadow," Poirot repeated. His expression was unreadable. Then, before anyone could say another word, a sound shattered the silence. A loud crash from the hallway. Hastings jumped. Good heavens, what was that? Poirot was already moving. He stepped swiftly out of the drawing-room, Hastings at his heels. They reached the hallway just as a figure, Sir Benedict Howard, stumbled back, his face pale. Poirot followed his gaze. His eyes narrowed. A cabinet had been knocked over. The wooden door was slightly ajar, revealing a small passageway leading out of sight. Hastings inhaled sharply. A hidden passage? Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. Indeed, Hastings. He turned to Sir Benedict. And tell me, monsieur, were you about to use it? Sir Benedict opened his mouth, but no words came. Poirot gave a small, satisfied nod. Then, mes amis, I believe we have our first truly interesting discovery. Chapter 5. The Passage of Secrets. A hush fell over the corridor as all eyes turned to the hidden passageway, its darkened entrance gaping like the mouth of some silent conspirator. The fallen cabinet lay askew, the impact of its crash still ringing in the ears of those present. Sir Benedict Howard stood rigid, his face pale in the dim light of the hallway lamps. Poirot, ever composed, stepped forward and peered inside. The sharp eyes swept over the dust-ridden floorboards, the cobwebbed corners, the narrow walls pressing close. Ah, he murmured, a most interesting discovery, is it not? Hastings frowned. I say, Poirot, how did no one know about this? It seems rather conspicuous. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. In old estates such as these, hidden passages were often built into the architecture. Servants' corridors, escape routes, or discreet means for quiet rendezvous. But more importantly, he turned to Sir Benedict. Why, monsieur, were you so eager to enter it? Sir Benedict straightened his shoulders. I wasn't eager, Poirot. I was simply investigating. Like you. Ah. Poirot's eyes twinkled with something unreadable. Then you will not mind if I take the lead, n'est-ce pas? Without waiting for an answer, Poirot stepped into the passageway, brushing aside the cobwebs with distaste. Hastings, after a moment's hesitation, followed. The air was thick with dust, the scent of age and neglect filling the narrow space. The corridor stretched ahead, winding deeper into the house. Their footsteps echoed lightly against the wooden planks. Poirot's hand trailed along the wall as he moved, his fingers delicate, searching. Then, suddenly, he halted. Regardez, Hastings! Hastings stepped closer. "What is it?" Poirot crouched, gesturing to the floorboards beneath them. Amid the settled dust, a series of faint footprints could be seen. Not old, but fresh. Hastings inhaled sharply. "Good heavens! Someone's been through here recently." Poirot nodded. "Très intéressant. Someone used this passage after Lord Marchington's death." Hastings frowned. "But why? And where does it lead?" Poirot pressed forward, his steps careful, his mind racing through possibilities. The passage twisted left, then right, before finally ending at a small wooden door. Poirot examined it, then, with a gentle push, eased it open. The two men stepped out into the library. Hastings blinked. "Of course, that explains it. The murderer must have used this passage to escape unseen after committing the crime." Poirot pursed his lips. "Perhaps, but let us not be too hasty." His eyes swept the library, its towering bookshelves casting long shadows. His attention fell upon a small wooden table near the fireplace. A glass of brandy, still half full, rested upon it. Next to it a small scrap of torn paper. Poirot moved forward, picking up the paper fragment. He examined it closely. Hastings watched. "What does it say?" Poirot turned it slightly toward the light. The faded ink revealed only one word: regret. Hastings exhaled. Regret? What on earth does that mean? Poirot did not answer immediately. His mind was turning, connecting invisible threads, arranging the puzzle pieces where they belonged. He turned back toward the passage entrance. "This corridor, it is not merely an escape route. No, mon ami, it is something more." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot held up the paper. "Consider, if the murderer had used this passage to escape unnoticed, would they have left behind evidence? No. And yet, here we find a message, one linked to our victim's last moments." His voice lowered. "No, Hastings. I believe this passage was used before the murder took place." Hastings gaped. "You mean someone met Lord Marchington here before he was killed?" "Exactement." Poirot tapped the paper. "And someone left behind this single word, regret. But regret for what, mon ami?" A tense silence settled between them. Then the door to the library creaked. Poirot turned sharply. In the doorway stood Lady Margaret, her face drawn, her hands clasped at her sides. "You found it," she whispered. Poirot studied her carefully. "Yes, madame, and I suspect you knew of its existence?" She hesitated. Then softly, "Yes, I knew." Hastings stiffened. "And yet you didn't mention it?" She exhaled shakily. "Because it was not my secret to tell." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Then tell me, madame, who used this passage?" A long pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "My husband." Hastings startled. "What?" Poirot merely inclined his head. "Go on, madam." Lady Margaret stepped further into the room. "For years he kept this passage a secret. He used it when he wanted to meet someone privately, without being seen." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Who did he meet?" She closed her eyes briefly. Then, a woman. A sharp intake of breath from Hastings. Poirot, however, remained still. "Who was she?" he asked. Lady Margaret's gaze dropped. I don't know her name. I only know that she came here to the library once before. I saw her from the corridor. She and my husband spoke in hushed voices, and when I confronted him, he simply said, "Some regrets cannot be undone." Poirot's fingers tightened slightly over the paper scrap. "Did she come again?" Lady Margaret hesitated. I don't know, but I believe so." Poirot's expression did not change, but something in his eyes flickered. At last he turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, I fear we must return to the drawing-room. For now, we have two key questions before us." Hastings nodded. "And they are—" Poirot held up two fingers. "1. Who was the woman Lord Marchington met in secret? And 2, his voice darkened, is she still here?" Chapter 6. The Phantom Woman Lady. Margaret's confession hung in the air like an echo of some long-buried sin. Poirot's sharp gaze did not waver from her as she wrung her hands, her pale fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. Hastings, still struggling to absorb the revelation, spoke first. "I say, Poirot, this changes everything, doesn't it?" He turned to Lady Margaret. "You mean to say Lord Marchington was meeting a woman in secret? Here, in the library, look." Margaret swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, I saw them only once, some months ago. I do not know how often she came or what they discussed, but I do know this. My husband had regrets, Monsieur Poirot. He was a proud man, but even he could not hide that from me." Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Regrets, madam? And yet you do not know what, or who, caused them?" She shook her head. "No, I never saw her face clearly. I only glimpsed her entering the library through the passage, always in the dead of night. I never dared to follow." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Curious, and yet, madame, I must ask, why did you not speak of this before?" She hesitated. "Because I did not think it mattered." Hastings let out a disbelieving laugh. "Didn't matter? A secret woman sneaking through hidden corridors to meet your husband, and you thought it didn't matter?" Poirot lifted a hand. "Calm yourself, Hastings." He turned back to Lady Margaret. "Madame, I suspect it matters very much, and what is more, I suspect you knew that as well." Lady Margaret's lips parted slightly as if to protest, but then she lowered her gaze. I was afraid." "Afraid of what, madam?" Poirot's voice was gentle but insistent. She exhaled, shakily. "Afraid of what I might discover." A weighty silence filled the room. Poirot studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well, madame. I will ask you only one more thing for now. To your knowledge, was this woman present at the party last night?" Lady Margaret's fingers trembled against the folds of her dress. I cannot say for certain." "But you suspect?" A slow nod. "Yes, I believe she was." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "Then, mon ami, we have much work to do." The gathering of suspects. The drawing-room was once again filled with tension as Poirot called for the suspects to reassemble. The guests, weary from the events of the past 24 hours, took their places, some anxious, some irritated, all expectant. Sir Benedict stood with arms folded, his sharp gaze flicking between Poirot and Lady Margaret. Across from him, Miss Letitia Farnsworth adjusted the lace cuffs of her sleeves, her expression unreadable. Dr. Howard leaned against the fireplace, his usual smirk absent. Poirot stepped forward, clasping his hands together. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have uncovered new information regarding our dearly departed Lord Marchington." A murmur passed through the group. Hastings, always eager to play his part, cleared his throat. "And let me tell you, it's quite the revelation. It seems our host was meeting a woman in secret, someone none of us knew about." A visible reaction. Letitia's hand stilled on her sleeve. Sir Benedict's frown deepened. Dr. Howard straightened. Poirot watched them closely. "Ah, you see. That is the expression I expected. Shock, curiosity, and from some of you, fear." Dr. Howard scoffed. "Fear? Don't be ridiculous. The man had his share of lovers in his youth, no doubt. What does it matter now?" "It matters," Poirot said smoothly, "because this woman may very well be the key to his murder." Silence. Letitia spoke first, her voice measured. "You suspect this unknown woman of killing Lord Marchington. I suspect she holds the answers we seek, mademoiselle." Poirot's gaze flicked to Sir Benedict. "And I suspect that one of you knows precisely who she is." Sir Benedict's jaw tightened. "That's absurd." Poirot smiled. "Is it, monsieur? Then allow me to be more direct." He took a measured step forward. "Last night, after the party had dwindled, did any of you see an unfamiliar figure near the library? A shadow where none should have been? A movement at the edge of your vision?" The group exchanged glances. Then, yes. All heads turned to Letitia Farnsworth. Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, go on." She hesitated. "I wasn't sure at the time. I assumed I had imagined it, but I did see someone near the corridor outside the library after the party." "Did you recognize them?" "No," she admitted. "It was a woman. I could tell by the silhouette. She moved quickly, almost too quickly, as if she were trying to avoid being seen. I didn't get a clear look before she vanished down the hall." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "Très intéressant. And tell me, mademoiselle, did this woman seem familiar to you?" Letitia's brow furrowed. "I can't be sure, but there was something, the way she moved, perhaps, that struck me as not entirely unfamiliar." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, and so we begin to unravel the thread." He turned back to the group. "Someone here knows exactly who this woman is, and I suspect that she is the true reason Lord Marchington was killed." Dr. Howard scoffed. "If that's true, why didn't she come forward? Why disappear into the night?" Poirot steepled his fingers. "Perhaps she could not. Perhaps she is afraid. Or—" His eyes gleamed. "Perhaps she is still among us, wearing a mask of innocence." A murmur of unease spread through the group. Sir Benedict let out an exasperated breath. "Poirot, do you ever speak plainly?" Poirot chuckled. "But, mon cher, where would be the fun in that?" His expression turned serious. "No, monsieur, I do not speak plainly, not yet. There are still pieces missing, but I assure you, we are close." His gaze swept over the assembled guests. "One of you knows the identity of this woman. One of you may even be protecting her." He turned on his heel. "Hastings, come. There is still much to investigate." A whisper in the night later that evening, as the household settled into an uneasy silence, Poirot and Hastings continued their search. Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each more tantalizing than the last. And then, just as the night crept into its deepest hour, a whisper, soft, barely audible, but distinct. Poirot and Hastings turned sharply. The voice came from the corridor outside the library. Poirot stepped forward, Hastings close behind. A figure stood in the shadows, a woman half obscured by the dim light. Poirot's heart quickened. "Madame," he said softly, "it is time to speak the truth." A pause. Then the woman stepped forward into the light. Hastings inhaled sharply. "You!" Poirot's eyes shone, and with a small, satisfied smile, he whispered, "Enfin." Chapter 7. The Woman in the Osier Shadows. The dim glow from the corridor lantern flickered, casting shifting shadows along the walls as Poirot and Hastings stood face to face with the mysterious woman. She hesitated on the threshold between darkness and light, her breath shallow, her body taut as though considering flight. Poirot, ever the master of human nature, raised a reassuring hand.
"Madame, there is no need for fear. Hercule Poirot is here to listen, not to condemn." The woman inhaled deeply, then stepped forward into full view. Hastings let out a shocked exclamation. Miss Catherine Armitage?" Indeed, it was none, other than the Marchingtons' quiet yet watchful maid, a woman who had, until now, played a seemingly insignificant role in the grand tragedy. Her uniform, usually crisp and well-kept, was now slightly wrinkled, her auburn hair escaping from its neat bun. But it was her eyes, wide, alert, brimming with uncertainty, that caught Poirot's attention. "You," Hastings continued, incredulous.
"You were the woman sneaking into the library?" Catherine swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes." Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. "Enfin." The silence between them deepened, thick with unspoken truths.
Poirot clasped his hands together and gestured toward the nearby parlour. "Come, mademoiselle. Let us not conduct such an important discussion standing in the cold corridor." Catherine hesitated but then nodded, stepping past them into the
room. Hastings followed, his mind clearly racing with questions.
Poirot closed the door behind them, sealing their small world in a bubble of secrecy. "Now," Poirot said, gesturing for Catherine to sit, "let us begin at the beginning, n'est-ce pas?" She perched on the edge of the chair, hands clenched, in her lap. I don't know where to start." "Start," Poirot said gently, "with the truth." Catherine looked down at her hands. "I didn't kill him." Poirot inclined his head. "This I already know. But you are not here to protest innocence, mademoiselle. You are here because you hold knowledge that others do not." A tremor passed through her shoulders. "Yes." Hastings crossed his arms. "You were meeting Lord Marchington in secret, weren't you?" "Why?" A pause, then, "Because he was my father." The room froze. Hastings gaped. "Good heavens!" Poirot, however, merely nodded, as if hearing the final note of a melody he had already anticipated. "Bien sûr." Catherine let out a shaky breath. "I was his illegitimate daughter. He never acknowledged me publicly, but he provided for me in quiet ways. My mother? She was once a housemaid here at Marchington Manor. She and Lord Marchington
had an affair. When I was born, she left to raise me alone, but she never let me forget where I came from."
Poirot's voice was gentle. "And you came here to work in the house of the man who never claimed you?" She nodded. "It wasn't about revenge or resentment. I wanted to know him, to understand the man behind the title." Her
voice faltered. "At first, He avoided me. But then a year ago he summoned me to the library. That's when he finally admitted the truth.
He told me he regretted never being a father to me. And then she trailed off, biting her lip. Poirot leaned forward. Then what, mademoiselle? Catherine hesitated. Then he told me he planned to change his will. A sharp intake of breath from Hastings. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, très intéressant, Catherine continued, voice barely above a whisper. He said he was going to leave me something substantial, something that would ensure I never had to serve anyone. Again, Poirot's fingers steepled. And did anyone else know of this? She shook her head. Not that I'm aware of. He warned me to keep it secret. Hastings let out a low whistle. Well, that explains quite a bit, doesn't it? If Lord Marchington was planning to alter his will, someone, perhaps someone, who stood to inherit, might have wanted to stop him. Poirot nodded. Précisément. Catherine shivered. That's why I didn't come forward sooner. I was afraid. If someone was willing to kill him to protect their inheritance, what would they do to me? Poirot regarded her with sympathy. You were wise to be cautious, mademoiselle. But now your silence serves only to protect the guilty. Catherine hesitated. Then, her gaze steady, she said, I'll tell you everything I know. A new trail of secrets. As Poirot and Hastings escorted Catherine back to her quarters, a new layer of the case settled into place. Poirot, ever lost in thought, walked with measured steps, his hands clasped behind his back. Hastings, however, was far less composed. I say, Poirot, this changes everything. If Marchington was going to alter his will, we've just found the perfect motive for murder. Poirot gave a small smile. Ah, Hastings, but the mystery is not so simple. Tell me, mon ami, does it not strike you as strange that no one mentioned any
knowledge of a change in the will? Hastings frowned. Now that you mention it, yes, exactement. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And yet, someone must have known. They reached the servants' quarters where Catherine hesitated at
the door. Monsieur Poirot? Yes, mademoiselle. If I tell you something, will you promise not to dismiss it as foolish? Poirot inclined his head. I never dismiss the thoughts of a keen observer, mademoiselle. She took a deep breath. Last night, after Lord Marchington was murdered, I heard something. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Go on. She glanced down the dimly lit hallway as if fearing unseen ears. Then in a whisper, a woman's voice. Crying. Hastings' brow furrowed. Crying? Catherine nodded. It was faint, but unmistakable. It came from the east wing, near the guest
rooms. I thought I was imagining it, but now I wonder. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. Mademoiselle, you have given us much to consider. As they departed, Poirot's mind was already racing ahead. A woman's voice, weeping, a missing
will, a killer still at large, and Hercule Poirot, ever patient, ever watchful, was closing in. Chapter 8. The Ghosts of Marchington Manor. The corridors of Marchington Manor whispered with the echoes of untold secret, as Poirot and Hastings moved with quiet purpose. The revelation of Catherine Armitage's true parentage had shifted the investigation in a profound way. Lord Marchington had intended to change his will. The implications were staggering. Yet, as Poirot had said, there was a peculiar detail that gnawed at him. No one had mentioned anything about a new will. If Marchington had indeed planned to alter it, where was the document, and why had no one spoken of it? And now a new clue had emerged, a weeping woman heard on the night of the murder. Poirot's mind raced ahead, a ghostly sob in the dead of night. No, Poirot did not believe in ghosts, but he did believe in guilt and grief. Someone within these walls was burdened with a terrible truth, and Hercule Poirot would find them. A midnight inquiry. The east wing of Marchington Manor was the least used part of the house. It housed several guest rooms, though most had remained unoccupied since Lady Marchington's passing. The doors stood closed, dust motes drifting lazily through the dimly lit corridor. Poirot ran his fingers along the polished railing of the banister. "Tell me, Hastings, does this not strike you as a most peculiar place for a grieving woman to weep?" Hastings, ever one to frown at Poirot's riddles, sighed. "I suppose, yes. But who could it have been?" "Ah, that is the question, mon ami. If we know who weeps, we may know who deceives." Poirot stopped before a door near the end of the hallway. He reached out and pressed a gloved hand against it. "This was the room of Lady Marchington," he murmured. Hastings blinked. "Good heavens, you don't mean to say—" Poirot turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room had not been touched in years. Dust coated the furniture in a fine layer. A large, faded portrait of Lady Marchington hung above the fireplace, her kind yet solemn eyes gazing down at them. A four-poster bed stood untouched, draped in heavy crimson curtains. Poirot stepped
inside. "A woman wept here, Hastings," he said softly, "and I intend to find out why." A hidden mourner. Poirot's investigation did not go unnoticed.
As he and Hastings examined the room, a soft rustling came from the doorway. Hastings turned sharply. "Who's there?" A figure stood in the shadows, a woman, her form slight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mrs. Radcliffe," Poirot said gently. The housekeeper stepped forward hesitantly. Her normally composed face bore signs of recent distress. Her eyes were rimmed with red. "You were here last night, weren't you?" Poirot asked. "You were the one weeping." Mrs. Radcliffe's lips trembled. I don't know what you mean." Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "Madame, you are a woman who has served this house for many years. You have witnessed its joys and its tragedies, and now you hold within you a sorrow too great to bear alone." She shuddered. Poirot gestured toward the armchair by the fireplace. "Sit, madame. Tell me the truth." There was a long pause. Then slowly, Mrs. Radcliffe nodded and sank into the chair. "I loved her," she whispered. Hastings frowned. "Loved who?" "Lady Marchington." Poirot nodded. "Ah." "She was my friend," Mrs. Radcliffe continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Before she was the lady of this house, she was simply Eleanor. She and I grew up together. She trusted me."
"And I—" She broke off, covering her mouth with her hand. Poirot knelt beside her chair. "You wept for her last night? Why?" Mrs. Radcliffe's body shook. "Because I heard something." Hastings's eyes widened. "What do you mean? That—"
Housekeeper swallowed hard. "Last night, after everyone had gone to bed, I passed this room, and I heard something inside." Poirot's voice was calm. "What did you hear, madam?" A shuddering breath. Then a woman's voice, whispering. The room went utterly silent. Hastings spoke first, incredulous. "A whispering woman in a room that's been locked for years." Mrs. Radcliffe nodded. It sounded like Lady Marchington." Poirot's gaze was unreadable. "And what did she say?"
A tear slipped down the housekeeper's cheek. She said, "Find the will!" The vanishing document. The air in the room was heavy with an unspoken dread. Poirot stood slowly, his expression pensive. Mon Dieu, he murmured. A message from
Beyond the grave, or something far more terrestrial? Hastings was visibly unsettled. Poirot, you don't really think— Poirot held up a hand. Calm yourself, Hastings. The dead do not speak, but the living? Ah, they leave their traces. He turned to Mrs. Radcliffe. Madame, are you certain of what you heard? She nodded. I swear it. Poirot's fingers tapped against his chin. Then there is only one conclusion. Someone in this house knew about the will and has gone to great lengths to ensure it is never found. Hastings exhaled sharply. But where is it? Poirot smiled. That, mon ami, is the mystery. A dangerous discovery. The remainder of the night was spent searching. Poirot, with his impeccable attention to detail, examined every drawer, every
shelf, every hidden compartment. And then, just past midnight, a gasp from Hastings. Poirot, over here! Poirot crossed the room swiftly. Hastings had pulled aside the heavy drapes by the window, revealing a hidden panel in the wall. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Très bien. With careful precision, he pressed against the panel.
It creaked open. Inside was a small compartment, and within it a folded document, yellowed at the edges. Poirot retrieved it carefully, unfolding it with reverence. His sharp eyes scanned the contents, and then a triumphant glint. The will, he announced. The true will of Lord Marchington. Hastings let out a breath. By Jove, Poirot, we've done it! But Poirot's face remained solemn. No, mon ami, we have only begun. He turned, his gaze sharp. For whoever hid this document will not sit idly by. They have killed once to keep their secret. A pause. And they may yet kill again. Chapter 9. A trap for the guilty. The missing will had been found. For Hercule Poirot, it was both a triumph and a challenge. The parchment, carefully hidden behind the wall panel in Lady Marchington's former room, revealed a truth that someone had desperately tried to conceal. Lord Marchington had indeed changed his will before his death. The rightful heir was no longer his nephew, Edward Marchington, but rather his secret daughter, Catherine Armitage. But if this will had been hidden, what did that mean? That someone in the household, perhaps even multiple people, had known about it, and someone had killed to ensure that its existence remained buried. Poirot studied the document with meticulous care. The signature was clear. The witnesses were listed. The date was mere weeks before Lord Marchington's murder. Yet something still did not sit well with him. Mon cher Hastings, he said as they sat in the dimly lit study, we are at the most dangerous moment in our investigation. Hastings frowned. Dangerous? But we've found the will. Shouldn't we take it straight to the authorities? Poirot's eyes twinkled, but there was a sharpness in his expression. And tell me, mon ami, if we reveal our discovery now, what will happen? Hastings opened his mouth, then hesitated. The murderer, Poirot continued, has already killed once. If they know the will has been found, they will not hesitate to act again. Hastings swallowed. You mean? Yes, Poirot said. They may try to eliminate any further obstacles. Hastings' gaze fell to the will in Poirot's hands. Then what do you propose? Poirot's moustache twitched as he leaned back. We set a trap, my dear Hastings, and let the guilty one fall into it.
The announcement. The next morning, Poirot made a deliberate show of his discovery. During breakfast, with the household assembled, he stood, clearing his throat for attention. Mes amis, I have the pleasure of informing you that I have made un grand progrès. The room fell silent. Edward Marchington, seated at the head of the table, frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. Poirot held up the document. "I have found something of great importance. Something that changes everything." Lady Evelyn's teacup trembled in her hand. Catherine Armitage stiffened in her seat. Charles Radcliffe, his usual arrogance somewhat subdued, narrowed his eyes. Edward's fingers curled against the table. "What have you found?" Poirot smiled slightly. "All shall be revealed in due course, monsieur. I propose that we gather this evening in the drawing-room. I shall then lay out my findings." There was a pause. Then, "A charade," Charles Radcliffe scoffed. "You enjoy these games, Poirot, don't you?" Poirot gave a small bow. "Perhaps, monsieur, but games have a way of revealing who is playing fair and who is not." Radcliffe said nothing more, but Poirot noticed something as he scanned the room. Lady Evelyn looked pale. Catherine was gripping the edge of her chair. And Edward Marchington was no longer frowning. No, he was looking directly at Poirot, with an expression that could only be described as calculated. And in that moment, Poirot knew a shadow. In the night, Poirot did not sleep that evening. He sat in the library, the document resting on the desk before him. Hastings, though reluctant, had agreed to remain close by. "You really think they'll try something tonight?" he asked in a hushed voice. Poirot nodded. "But of course, Hastings, they have no choice." The clock chimed midnight. The manor was silent. Then a faint creak. Poirot did not move. A shadow slipped through the doorway. Silent, careful. The figure approached the desk, pausing just long enough to scan the room. And then a gloved hand reached forward. The instant the fingers touched the document, click, the lights blazed on. Hastings leapt to his feet. Poirot stood calmly. And before them, caught in the act, was Edward Marchington. His face contorted in a mixture of fury and shock. "Damn you, Poirot!" he hissed. Poirot folded his arms. "Ah, but monsieur, did you really think I would leave the Quai d'Orsay in will unguarded?" Edward's breath came fast. His eyes darted between Poirot and Hastings. "You don't understand," he muttered. Poirot took a step closer. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You knew about the will. You knew your uncle had changed his mind. And when you realized you would lose everything—" Edward's hands clenched into fists. "I had no choice." Poirot's voice was sharp. "No choice but to murder your own uncle." Hastings inhaled sharply. Edward Marchington's face darkened, and then the truth spilled forth, the murder unmasked. Edward Marchington had always been proud. He had been raised as the heir to Marchington Manor, believing it was his birthright. When he discovered, through sheer accident, that Lord Marchington planned to leave everything to a bastard daughter, rage had consumed him. "I couldn't let it happen," Edward spat. "That girl, Catherine, she had no claim. She wasn't part of this family. My uncle had lost his mind." "So you took matters into your own hands," Poirot said quietly. Edward exhaled sharply. "I didn't mean to kill him. I only meant to frighten him. I wanted to make him reconsider. But something had gone wrong. Lord Marchington had resisted. A struggle had ensued, and then— "I pushed him," Edward whispered. "He fell. I saw the blood, and He swallowed. "I hid the will that night. I thought, if no one ever found it, I could still inherit everything. Poirot's eyes were dark, and when I announced that I had found the will, Edward's expression twisted. I panicked. I had to destroy it before you could reveal it. Poirot sighed. But you were too late, monsieur. The truth, it always rises to the surface. A sudden sound from the doorway made them all turn. Catherine, Armitage stood there. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with disbelief. "You murdered him," she whispered. "You killed my father." Edward flinched. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to deny it, but the weight of his confession had already sealed his fate. And in the distance, the sound of approaching footsteps signalled the arrival of the police. Final reflections. Later that night, after Edward Marchington had been taken away, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire. "You knew it was him," Hastings murmured. "Didn't you?" Poirot sipped his tea. "Not at first, Hastings, but as the puzzle pieces fell into place, I saw the shape of the truth." Hastings shook his head. "And all for money. Greed again." Poirot set down his cup. "Not just greed, mon ami. Pride." Hastings frowned. Poirot gestured towards the fire. "Monsieur Edward did not kill for wealth alone. He killed because he could not bear the thought of losing what he believed was his by right. And in that we see the great tragedy of human nature." Hastings exhaled. "And Catherine?" Poirot's expression softened. "She will inherit Marchington Manor, as her father wished, but no amount of wealth can ease the pain of such a loss." He stood. "Come, Hastings, the case is closed, and I find myself in need of a most excellent omelette aux fines herbes to restore my spirit." Hastings chuckled. "Poirot, you never change." Poirot smiled. "No, mon ami, and that is as it should be." With that, Hercule Poirot turned, his silhouette framed against the warm glow of the fire, and walked away. His little grey cells once, again victorious. Chapter 10. The Final Judgment. The grand hall of Marchington Manor was eerily silent. The storm that had raged outside had finally calmed, leaving behind a misty dawn, yet inside the manor the storm had not passed. Edward Marchington had confessed to the murder of his uncle, Lord Marchington, in a moment of rage and desperation. The truth had emerged, undeniable and damning, and now the final chapter of this tragic tale was unfolding. Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his keen eyes scanning the room as the household gathered for the last time. Hastings stood beside him, arms crossed, his expression troubled. Lady Evelyn Marchington sat stiffly, her face devoid of emotion, but her hands trembled as they held a silk handkerchief. Catherine Armitage, now confirmed as the rightful heir, looked dazed, still struggling to process the truth about her father and the man who had killed him. Charles Radcliffe, the ever-arrogant businessman, looked irritated, as if the entire affair had been an inconvenience to his carefully planned investments. Detective Inspector Barnes had arrived just an hour ago to take Edward Marchington into custody. Now, he stood near the doorway, watching with a grim expression. Poirot finally spoke. "It is done," he said softly. "The truth has been revealed. Edward Marchington will face justice for his crime." A heavy silence followed. Lady Evelyn broke it first. "I still do not believe it." Her voice was hoarse. Edward was always reckless. But a murderer? She shook her head. He was a fool, yes, but I cannot imagine he wanted his uncle dead. Poirot studied her. And yet, milady, a fool with enough desperation becomes capable of anything. Lady Evelyn's lips pressed together. And Catherine, she murmured, turning to the young woman, you are now to inherit Marchington Manor. Catherine barely reacted. It does not feel like an inheritance, she said quietly. I never knew my father. And now, because of this, I will never get the chance. Poirot inclined his head solemnly. Oui, mademoiselle. There is no greater loss than the loss of what could have been. Catherine's fingers curled against her lap. I do not want this house. I do not want this fortune. What good is wealth when it is stained with blood? Hastings looked at Poirot with concern, but Poirot remained impassive. That, mademoiselle, is a question only you can answer in time. Another silence. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow, regret, and the weight of justice. And yet, Poirot was not finished. The unanswered question Poirot stood abruptly. Before we close this affair, there is one final matter to address. Hastings frowned. What do you mean, Poirot? Poirot turned to Inspector Barnes. Tell me, mon ami, when you examined Lord Marchington's body, did you notice anything strange? Barnes narrowed his eyes. Strange? What are you getting at, Poirot? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and paced slowly. You see, mes amis, Edward Marchington confessed. He admitted to pushing his uncle. He believed he had caused his death. Everyone watched him, puzzled. Poirot continued, But I ask you, did he? Did he truly kill Lord Marchington? A chill passed through the room. Catherine inhaled sharply. Are you saying he didn't do it? Poirot stopped pacing and turned to the inspector. The post-mortem report, monsieur. What was the precise cause of death? Barnes shifted uncomfortably. Head trauma. The fall caused a fatal blow. Precisely. Poirot nodded. But here is the curious thing. The wound was not consistent with the position of the fall. Hastings gasped. Good heavens, Poirot! Are you saying someone else struck him after he fell? Poirot raised a finger. Exactement. Gasps filled the room. Lady Evelyn looked horrified. Then who? Poirot's gaze sharpened. Who indeed? He turned to Catherine. Mademoiselle, you have spent much time in this house over the past few months. Tell me, who else had reason to see your father's will disappear? Catherine's eyes widened. Not just Edward, she whispered. Poirot gave a small, sad smile. No, mademoiselle. Edward may have pushed him, but the fatal blow, the one that truly ended Lord Marchington's life, was dealt by someone else. He turned slowly. And that person is in this very room. A hush fell over the drawing-room. Lady Evelyn's face drained of colour. Charles Radcliffe shifted uneasily.
Poirot's voice was firm, unwavering. Lady Evelyn Marchington, he said softly, it was you who ensured your brother-in-law's death. The true murderer, a sharp intake of breath. Lady Evelyn rose to her feet. That is an outrageous lie, Poirot remained calm. Is it, milady? Or is it the one truth you cannot bear to face? Lady Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Why on earth would I kill Lord Marchington? Poirot's expression turned sombre. because you had the most to lose if the will was revealed. He turned to Catherine. Edward may have been disinherited, but his mother, Lady Evelyn, depended on that wealth to maintain her standing, her estate, her life. If her son lost everything, so did she. Hastings' mouth fell open. "Good Lord!" Poirot nodded. Edward acted in a moment of blind fury, but Lady Evelyn, she acted with calculation. When she saw her brother-in-law unconscious, she finished what Edward had begun. Lady Evelyn staggered backward, shaking her head. "No, no, you are mistaken." Poirot stepped forward. "The post-mortem report did not lie, milady. The injury pattern was inconsistent with a simple fall. Someone used a heavy object to strike Lord Marchington's skull after he had already fallen." Poirot's voice softened, but his words were no less damning. "And only you, milady, had the opportunity to do so while Edward fled in panic." Lady Evelyn's breath came in short gasps. She looked around the room as if searching for support. But the others, Catherine, Radcliffe, even Inspector Barnes, stared at her in growing horror. "You saw the will," Poirot pressed. "You knew your future was at risk."
"And so you took the chance to silence your brother-in-law forever." Lady Evelyn trembled. No, it was not me, And then, as if something inside her broke, she sank into the chair. Her hands covered her face, and she whispered, "He was—"
"A fool to change the will. A fool." Silence. Poirot exhaled. "And so the final piece of the puzzle falls into place." Hastings spoke in a low voice. "Good God, Poirot, we almost condemned the wrong person entirely." Poirot gave a small nod. "Indeed, mon ami. Edward was guilty, but not of murder. He was guilty of cowardice and selfishness, but the true murderer was Lady Evelyn." Barnes approached her carefully. "Lady Evelyn Marchington, I have no choice but to place you under arrest for the murder."
"Of Lord Marchington?" She did not resist. Instead, she simply let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Justice," she murmured. "What a cruel joke."
Poirot watched as she was led away. The storm outside had passed, and within Marchington Manor, justice had finally been served. Final reflections. That evening, Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart. "Quite a case, Poirot," Hastings said, shaking his head. "First Edward, then Lady Evelyn. The truth was far more tangled than I ever expected." Poirot smiled faintly. "The truth, Hastings, is rarely simple, but it always finds its way to the light." As they stepped outside, Catherine approached
them.
"Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Poirot inclined his head. "Your father wished for you to have this estate. It is now yours to shape as you see fit." Catherine hesitated. "I think I shall sell it. Start a new life somewhere far
from here." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A wise decision, mademoiselle. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to leave it behind." With that, he turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, the case is closed, and I find myself in need of a most excellent tisane before our next adventure begins." And with that, Hercule Poirot walked into the misty morning, his
little grey cells at peace once more. Chapter 11. A farewell to shadows, the aftermath of Lady Evelyn. Marchington's arrest sent ripples through the village of Marchington-on-Thames. The Marchington estate, once a symbol of aristocratic grandeur, now bore the stain of scandal, betrayal, and murder. Hercule Poirot, having pieced together the final threads of the mystery, stood at the grand entrance of the manor with Captain Hastings. It was a crisp autumn morning, the mist slowly dissipating as the first rays of sunlight bathed the estate in golden light. "Quite a mess, Poirot," Hastings muttered, hands in his coat pockets. "Two suspects, one murderer, a hidden will, and a fortune left in limbo. I can't say I've ever seen a case unfold quite like this." Poirot gave a knowing smile. "Ah, mon ami, but is it not always so? The truth hides behind veils of deception, yet it always finds a way to reveal itself in the end." Catherine Armitage approached them, her face weary but resolute. The burden of her newfound inheritance weighed on her shoulders. "Mr. Poirot," she said, offering a tired smile, "I suppose this is goodbye?" Poirot studied her for a moment. "And what will you do now, mademoiselle?" She hesitated, glancing toward the looming walls of Marchington Manor. "I thought about keeping it, trying to restore some sense of dignity to this place, but I can't. This house has too many ghosts, too much pain."
Hastings gave an understanding nod. "A fresh start, then?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I'll sell the manor. Use the money to start over somewhere new." Poirot reached out gently, placing a hand over hers. "A wise choice, mademoiselle. The past is a burden too heavy to carry forever. You are free now, to live not in its shadow, but in your own light." Catherine's eyes glistened. "Thank you, Mr. Poirot. If not for you, I might never have known the truth about my father." Poirot inclined, his head solemnly. "Truth is sometimes painful, mademoiselle, but it is always better than living in illusion." Hastings cleared his throat. "Well, Poirot, I'd say our work here is done." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but there is one more thing." Hastings frowned. "What now?" Poirot gestured toward the manor. "Before we depart, I wish to pay one last visit to the study where this mystery first began." Catherine looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, follow me." The Room of Secrets. The study was just as they had left it. A grand space filled with bookshelves, an ornate desk, and the lingering scent of old paper and brandy. The heavy curtains filtered the morning light, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Poirot stepped forward, his fingers gliding over the surface of the desk. His gaze landed on the blood-stained invitation, the one that had summoned the guests to Marchington Manor on the night of the murder. Hastings watched curiously. Poirot, surely the case is solved. What more is there to uncover?" Poirot picked up the invitation and turned it over. "You recall, mon ami, that I have often said there is no such thing as coincidence in crime." Hastings crossed his arms. "Yes, you do go on about that quite a bit." Poirot ignored him, focusing instead on the handwriting on the back of the invitation. It was smudged but still legible. "The storm will break before midnight. Be prepared." Catherine gasped. "I don't remember seeing that before." Poirot nodded, because it was written in haste, perhaps by someone who feared discovery. Hastings leaned in. "But what does it mean?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It means, Hastings, that someone else knew about the events that would unfold that night. Someone who understood that the will would be revealed, and that a murder was likely to occur." Catherine shivered. "You think someone else was involved?" Poirot sighed. "No, mademoiselle. The one who wrote this was not a murderer, but an observer, someone who, for reasons of their own, could not intervene, but wished to leave a warning." Hastings scratched his head. "But who? And why not say anything sooner? Poirot placed the invitation back on the desk. Alas, Hastings, there are some secrets that even Poirot cannot unravel. Perhaps this silent witness feared for their own safety, or perhaps they hoped the truth would surface on its own. Catherine hugged herself. I suppose we'll never know. Poirot nodded. No, mademoiselle, some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. With that, he turned and straightened his cuffs. Come, Hastings, we have done all that we can. Departure and reflection. Hour later, Poirot and Hastings stood on the train platform, awaiting their departure from Marchington-on-Thames. The small station was quiet, save for the occasional whistle of the distant locomotive. Hastings exhaled, rubbing his chin. You know, Poirot, I think this case has troubled me more than most. Poirot looked at him curiously. And why is that, mon ami? Hastings hesitated before answering. Because, for the first time, I almost believed we had the wrong man. Edward's confession seemed so final. And yet, he wasn't the real killer. I can't help but wonder. How many times has justice gone astray in other cases where there was no Poirot to set things right? Poirot's expression softened. Ah, Hastings, it is a question that haunts all who seek the truth. But we must believe that justice, though sometimes slow, will always find its way. Hastings gave a half-smile. And what of Catherine? Do you think she'll be all right? Poirot's gaze turned towards the distant manor, now just a silhouette in the mist. She is strong, and strength, mon ami, is the greatest inheritance of all. The train's whistle blew, signalling their imminent departure. Poirot and Hastings boarded, settling into their seats as the countryside rolled past. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. Hastings, my friend, I believe it is time for a well-earned rest. No more murders for a while, yes? Hastings chuckled. I'll hold you to that, Poirot. Poirot closed his eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. We shall see, mon ami. We shall see. As the train pulled away from Marchington-on-Thames, the case of the blood-stained invitation was finally closed. But for Hercule Poirot, the world was full of mysteries yet to come. And soon enough another case would call his little grey cells into action once more. Chapter 12. The final puzzle, the train carried Poirot and Hastings away from Marchington-on-Thames, its rhythmic, filling the air with a steady, hypnotic sound. They sat in a private compartment, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green and gold, as the autumn leaves clung stubbornly to their branches. The case was officially closed. Lady Evelyn Marchington was in police custody, and Catherine Armitage was left to decide her future. And yet, Poirot sat in his seat, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half-closed in deep thought. Hastings watched him with growing curiosity. Poirot, you've hardly said a word since we left. That usually means one of two things. Either you are about to take a nap, or you are still thinking about the case. Poirot slowly opened his eyes. Ah, mon ami, it is the latter. And tell me, Hastings, does anything about this case still trouble you? Hastings frowned. Trouble me? Well, I should say not. The murderer has been caught, the motive laid bare, and Catherine is free to move on with her life. I'd say that's about as satisfactory an ending as one could hope for." Poirot exhaled softly, his fingers tapping against his knee. "And yet, Hastings, there are things that do not sit well with me." Hastings sighed. "Go on then, let's hear it." Poirot leaned forward. "Consider this. Lady Evelyn in the end confessed to everything. She admitted to poisoning her brother, she admitted to forging the will, and she even admitted to her plan to frame young Edward. And yet she was silent on one thing." Hastings frowned. "Which was?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "The blood-stained invitation." Hastings blinked. "But we already determined that it was simply the result of the struggle in the study. When Lord Marchington was murdered, the invitation was nearby and became stained with his blood." Poirot shook his head. "Non, non, mon ami. You misunderstand. I do not mean the physical stain. I mean the note written on the back. The warning. The storm will break before midnight. Be prepared." Hastings shifted in his seat. "Yes, I remember that now. But wasn't it just an anonymous warning? Someone who suspected the will was going to be revealed." Poirot's voice lowered. "And yet no one has come forward to claim they wrote it." Hastings hesitated. "You think it means something more?" Poirot nodded. "It was not written by Lady Evelyn. That much I am certain of. She had no reason to warn anyone. She was the one orchestrating the crime. So tell me, Hastings, who else could have written it? And why did they never speak up?" Hastings opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't have an answer. An unexpected return. The train arrived in London by early evening. The streets were bustling with life, the glow of gas lamps illuminating the foggy air. Poirot and Hastings stepped onto the platform, Poirot adjusting his cuffs with great precision. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, stretching his legs. "What, now? A quiet dinner at the club. A well-earned rest." Poirot gave him a small smile. "Perhaps, mon ami. But first, there is something I must do." Hastings groaned. "Oh no, Poirot, don't tell me." Poirot raised a hand. "Only a small detour, Hastings, a brief visit to an old friend." Before Hastings could protest further, Poirot hailed a cab, giving the driver an address in Mayfair. The unfinished letter, they arrived at a stately townhouse in one of London's quieter streets. Poirot stepped out and rang the bell, Hastings reluctantly following. A butler answered, his face neutral, but his eyes betraying mild surprise at their presence. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with a slight bow, "I was not expecting you." "Indeed, no one ever expects Poirot, mon ami," Poirot said lightly. "Is Mr. Alfred Weatherby at home?" The butler hesitated, then stepped aside. "Please, come in." Hastings leaned toward Poirot as they entered. "Who the devil is Alfred Weatherby?" he whispered. Poirot smiled slightly. "Patience, Hastings. You shall see." They were led into a well-appointed study, where an elderly man sat at a desk, poring over some documents. He looked up as they entered, his expression wary. "Mr. Poirot," he said slowly, "I wasn't expecting to see you again." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, Mr. Weatherby, I do apologize for the intrusion, but you see, I have one last question regarding the Marchington affair." Weatherby sighed, removing his glasses. "I've told you everything I know." Poirot stepped closer. "Have you?" His gaze landed on a stack of letters on the desk. You were Lord Marchington's solicitor for many years, n'est-ce pas? Yes, Weatherby admitted. I handled all of his estate matters. Poirot picked up a letter on the desk and examined the handwriting. This is your handwriting, n'est-ce pas? Weatherby stiffened. Yes, why? Poirot slowly pulled out the invitation from his pocket, the very one that had been found at the crime scene. He turned it over and placed it before Weatherby. The note on the back of this invitation, it is also your handwriting. A long silence followed. Hastings felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Weatherby swallowed. How did you— Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mon cher monsieur, it was not difficult. You knew about the hidden will. You suspected that Marchington's revelation would cause an uproar, and so you wrote this warning. Hastings gasped. You mean he knew a murder would happen? Weatherby shook his head vigorously. No! I swear I didn't know anyone was going to die. I only wrote that note because I feared something terrible would happen. Arguments, a scandal, perhaps even a public disgrace for the family. I never imagined he trailed off. Poirot nodded solemnly. And yet, when the murder did occur, you said nothing. Weatherby looked down at his hands. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I came forward, I'd be accused of knowing more than I did. Afraid that I'd be blamed. Hastings exhaled. Well, I suppose that explains it. But good heavens, Weatherby, you might have saved a life if you'd spoken up. Weatherby looked away, his face drawn. I know. Poirot straightened his cuffs. Justice has been served, monsieur. Lady Evelyn is in custody. But next time, if there is a next time, I do hope you will not let fear silence you. Weatherby nodded mutely. Poirot turned on his heel. Come, Hastings. Our work here is finished. A case concluded. Back in the cab, Hastings let out a long sigh. Well, Poirot, I must say, that was unexpected. But at least now we have all the pieces of the puzzle. Poirot smiled, looking out at the London streets. Indeed, mon ami, every case leaves behind its shadows, but in the end the truth always emerges. Hastings chuckled. You know, Poirot, sometimes I think you'd rather a case never be fully closed. You always seem to find one more question to answer. Poirot lifted a finger. Ah, but that is the nature of the mind, Hastings. To ask, to deduce, to seek clarity in the chaos. Hastings grinned. And now, finally, a quiet evening. Poirot chuckled. Perhaps, mon ami, perhaps. And as the cab carried them away, the case of the blood-stained invitation was truly, finally, closed. But for Hercule Poirot, there would always be another mystery waiting just around the corner. Chapter 13. The Curtain Falls. The heavy drizzle of rain tapped against the windows of the London apartment, a rhythmic lullaby that threatened to lull Captain Hastings into much-needed rest. He sat in his armchair, his eyelids drooping as he watched Poirot meticulously straighten a stack of papers on his desk. The case of Marchington Manor was over. Lady Evelyn Marchington had been arrested. The secrets of the blood-stained invitation had been laid bare, and yet Poirot seemed as sharp as ever, as if the gears in his brilliant mind had not stopped turning. Hastings let out a weary sigh. Poirot, I don't understand you. The case is solved, the villain is in custody, and justice has prevailed. Why, in heaven's name, Are you still thinking about it?" Poirot tilted his head slightly, his moustache twitching in quiet amusement. "Ah, mon ami, you do not yet comprehend the nature of the human mind. A case is never merely about justice. It is about understanding. There is always one final question left to ask." Hastings frowned. "And what question is that?" Poirot turned to him, his sharp eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Did we, in the end, solve everything?" Loose ends and lingering doubts. Hastings sat up. "Of course we did. Lady Evelyn confessed, didn't she? She admitted to killing Sir Hugo Marchington to cover up her past crimes and to ensure that no one discovered her secret, that she had forged the original will. It's an open and shut case." Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, but let us consider, Hastings. Why did she confess so quickly?" Hastings blinked. "Because she was caught red-handed." Poirot shook his head. "No, confessions are rarely so simple, mon ami. True guilt, deep, crushing guilt, does not always lead to immediate surrender. Instead, it leads to hesitation, denial, even panic. But Lady Evelyn confessed almost too willingly." Hastings frowned. "You're saying she wanted to be caught?" Poirot's fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair. "Perhaps, or perhaps, Hastings, she was protecting someone." An unexpected letter. Before Hastings could argue further, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. Poirot rose gracefully, adjusting the cuffs of his perfectly pressed shirt before opening the door. A young messenger stood there, soaked from the rain, holding an envelope sealed with a deep crimson wax stamp. "For you, sir," the boy said, breathlessly, thrusting the letter into Poirot's hands. Poirot accepted it with a slight nod, offering the boy a coin before closing the door. He examined the envelope with great interest. "No return address," he murmured, turning it over. He carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. As his eyes scanned the page, his expression, so often unreadable, grew suddenly unreadable in a different way. A flicker of something unsettling passed over his features. Hastings, watching him closely, sat forward. "Poirot, what is it?" Poirot's lips pursed. Then, in a quiet voice, he read aloud, "You have solved nothing, Monsieur Poirot. The truth remains buried where it belongs. But you are clever, so I give you a choice. Dig deeper, and you will regret it." It was unsigned. A chill ran through Hastings. "Good Lord, what does it mean?" Poirot folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his pocket. Then, with a small smile, he murmured, "It means, Hastings, that the story is not yet over." Revisiting the crime. The following morning, Poirot and Hastings took the first train back to Marchington Manor. Lady Evelyn was behind bars, but if Poirot was right, if someone else had been involved in the crime, then the true mastermind had yet to be revealed. As they approached the grand estate, Hastings muttered, "I must say, Poirot, it feels rather strange being back here now that the case is supposed to be closed." Poirot gave a slight nod. "Oui, mon ami. But a puzzle with a missing piece is not a puzzle solved." Their first stop was the Marchington family library, where the forged will had been hidden before Sir Hugo's murder. Poirot paced the room, his gaze flickering over the shelves. "Tell me, Hastings," he said suddenly, "who had the most to gain from Sir Hugo's death?" Hastings frowned. Lady Evelyn, of course. She inherited everything under the fake will. Poirot nodded. Oui. And who had the most to lose if the truth came out? Hastings thought for a moment. Well, Evelyn again, I suppose. Poirot sighed. Think harder, Hastings. He gestured around the room. The Marchington estate is old, yes, but it is also valuable. Lady Evelyn was set to inherit, but who else was deeply invested in ensuring the status quo remained unchanged? And then, as if a fog had lifted, it struck Hastings. My word, Poirot, the family solicitor, Mr. Lionel Carmichael. He oversaw the will and handled all legal matters. If he was in on the forgery, then he had just as much to lose as Evelyn. Poirot smiled approvingly. Très bien, Hastings. You begin to see. And let us not forget the letter we received last night. A threat, warning us away. Who else but the true culprit would feel the need to silence us? A final confrontation, they found Mr. Lionel Carmichael in his office in the village. The elderly solicitor, always so composed, seemed startled by their visit. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, to what do I owe the pleasure? Poirot took a seat, steepling his fingers. Monsieur Carmichael, let us not waste time. You knew about Lady Evelyn's forged will, did you not? Carmichael stiffened. I beg your pardon. You were her accomplice, Poirot continued calmly. You helped her falsify the will so that she would inherit everything. But you were clever, monsieur. You ensured that if she were ever caught, you could deny all involvement. Carmichael's hands clenched into fists. This is absurd. Poirot simply raised an eyebrow. Is it? He withdrew the letter from his pocket and placed it on the desk. I received this last night. A rather desperate attempt to frighten me off. But alas, mon cher monsieur, Poirot does not frighten so easily. Carmichael's face paled. Poirot leaned forward. Lady Evelyn has confessed to the murder, but you, monsieur, are guilty of the conspiracy, and I believe the police will be most interested in what you have to say. There was a long silence. Then, with a defeated sigh, Carmichael slumped back into his chair. Very well, he muttered. I suppose there's no point in denying it any longer. Hastings exhaled. Good heavens, Poirot, you've done it again. Poirot smiled, straightening his cuffs. Ah, mon ami, it was inevitable. The final reflection. That evening, back in London, Poirot and Hastings sat once more in their apartment. The rain had ceased, and the city lights twinkled outside the window. Hastings shook his head. So Carmichael was the one pulling the strings all along. Lady Evelyn thought she was in control, but really she was just a pawn. Poirot nodded. Precisely. The true villain often hides behind the obvious suspect. Hastings sighed. And, to think, we almost left this case unfinished. Poirot smiled softly. Non, mon ami. A mystery is never truly finished. It simply waits for the right mind to solve it. With that, Hercule Poirot lifted his teacup, took a delicate sip, and let the case of the blood-stained invitation finally rest. Chapter 14. The final reflection of Hercule Poirot. The hush that had settled over the grand drawing-room of Whitehaven Manor lingered like the final note of a haunting melody. Even with the culprit revealed, even with justice looming, the room pulsed with unspoken thoughts. Hercule Poirot, seated with impeccable posture in the high-backed chair, adjusted the cuffs of his neatly pressed suit. His moustache twitched slightly as he surveyed the faces of those present, some pale with shock, others flushed with residual tension. Sir Reginald Ashcombe, still reeling from the truth of his own nephew's betrayal, sat slumped in an armchair, his hands clasped, as though in silent prayer. Across from him, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe's usual regal composure had cracked. Her lips trembled, her fingers worrying at the pearls around her throat. Detective Inspector Harrington, ever the practical man, stood near the fireplace, his sharp eyes darting between Poirot and the now restrained culprit, Charles Danforth. The young man, once so poised and charming, now wore an expression of bitter resignation. His hands were bound, his fate sealed. "Alors?" Poirot murmured, breaking the silence at last. "Now that all is laid bare, I find myself reflecting on the many paths that led us to this moment. There is always something tragic, is there not, about the revelation of a murderer?" No one answered, but the weight of his words settled over the room. Hastings, standing beside Poirot, with a furrowed brow, cleared his throat. "It's all still so difficult to believe, old chap. Danforth was, well, he was practically family to the Ashcombes." "Indeed, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes glinting with something akin to sadness. "That is often the case. It is you. Not the strangers we must fear, but those we trust. The greatest crimes are committed in the shadow of love, ambition, or desperation." Charles Danforth let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. "You make it sound so poetic, Monsieur Poirot, but you forget, some of us had no choice." Poirot arched a delicate eyebrow. "No choice, Monsieur Danforth. That is a convenient illusion. No doubt you justified your actions, convinced yourself that you were the true victim. But in the end, you made each decision deliberately, no?" Danforth did not reply. Lady Eleanor swallowed hard, her voice strained. "Why, Charles, if you had been in trouble, we would have helped you. Reginald would have—" Danforth's eyes flashed with something sharp. "Helped me? When? How? Do you think your husband would have given up his precious inheritance for me? For his wayward nephew?" He scoffed. "No, Lady Eleanor, I knew what I had to do. I had to secure my place before it was too late." Poirot gave a slow nod. "And so, the blood-stained invitation, a carefully crafted scheme to eliminate one obstacle after another, all while ensuring suspicion fell elsewhere. You were patient, methodical, but in the end, mon cher monsieur, the little grey cells saw through it." Danforth's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent. Inspector Harrington exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "We'll take him in. He'll stand a trial, and the courts will see to it that justice is served." He motioned to his men, who stepped forward to escort Danforth from the room. As they passed Poirot, Danforth paused, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "Tell me, Poirot, was there ever a moment where you doubted, where you thought you might be wrong?" Poirot smiled, a small knowing smile. "Ah, monsieur, the doubts are always there. But the truth, it has a way of rising, like the cream in a fine cup of café au lait. And once it does, there is no ignoring it." Danforth gave a dry chuckle. "Well, I suppose I was doomed to the hour, moment you stepped into this house." Poirot inclined his head. Mais oui, you might say that. With that, Danforth was led away, his footsteps echoing down the grand hallway of Whitehaven Manor. Aftermath and reflection. The tension in the drawing-room slowly eased, though the scars of the night's revelations would not fade so easily. Sir Reginald sat in stunned silence, his mind no doubt replaying the events over and over. Lady Eleanor, ever the gracious hostess even in the face of tragedy, finally stood. I must see to the staff. There has been so much disruption. Her voice wavered, and Poirot, ever the gentleman, simply nodded in understanding. Hastings, rubbing the back of his neck, turned to Poirot. Well, that was quite the case, old chap. I must say, I thought the butler was guilty at one point. Poirot chuckled softly. Mon cher Hastings, you always suspect the butler. But in the world of Poirot, nothing is so simple. Hastings rolled his eyes. Yes, yes, rub it in, why don't you? But tell me, Poirot, what truly gave Danforth away? Poirot's eyes twinkled with satisfaction. Ah, Hastings, it was a series of things. The smallest of details. The way he spoke of the invitation before anyone had mentioned it, the contradiction in his alibi, and of course his reaction when I set my final psychological trap, placing the blood-stained envelope before him, and watching how he faltered. Hastings shook his head in admiration. I'll never understand how you do it. Poirot smiled. Ah, but that is why you are my dear friend, and not my rival, no? The two men shared a warm moment of camaraderie before Inspector Harrington rejoined them. I'll be taking my leave, Poirot, and I must say, I'd rather be on your side than against you. Poirot inclined his head. A wise choice, mon ami. Harrington chuckled before stepping away, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone in the grand hall of Whitehaven Manor. As the clock chimed the late hour, Hastings let out a sigh. Well, Poirot, another case solved. What now? Poirot smoothed his jacket, his gaze distant. Now, mon ami, we rest. But only for a moment. For mysteries, they have a way of finding Poirot, whether he seeks them or not. With that, the great detective turned, stepping out into the night, his silhouette poised against the flickering glow of the manor's grand entrance. The case of the blood-stained invitation was closed, but for Hercule Poirot, the dance of intellect and intrigue would never truly end. Chapter 15. The Unfinished Puzzle. The case of the blood-stained invitation had reached its conclusion. Or so it seemed. Charles Danforth was in police custody. The Ashcombe family was left reeling, and Whitehaven Manor had returned to a semblance of calm. But for Hercule Poirot, there was always one final detail to consider. Seated in his modest yet perfectly ordered London apartment, Poirot poured himself a cup of rich Belgian hot chocolate. Across from him, Captain Hastings leaned back in an armchair, his expression one of deep satisfaction. Well, Poirot, that's another case solved, Hastings declared, stretching his legs. I must say, Danforth was a rather cunning devil. He nearly had us all fooled. Poirot tapped his spoon against his saucer. Oui, mon ami, nearly. But as you know, nearly is not enough to outwit Hercule Poirot. Hastings chuckled. That's true enough. And now, I suppose we can put the case behind us. Poirot did not respond. Instead, his gaze rested on a single envelope lying on the table between them. It was identical to the invitations that had been sent out before the murder. Thick parchment, embossed edges, and a deep crimson wax seal. But this one was different. "Poirot," Hastings said cautiously, his brow furrowing. "That's not another invitation, is it?" Poirot picked up the envelope delicately, turning it between his fingers. "It is, mon ami. This arrived at my residence this very morning." Hastings sat up. "Good heavens! From who?" Poirot's lips curved ever so slightly. "That, my dear Hastings, is the question." With precise care, Poirot broke the seal and unfolded the note within. The handwriting was elegant, yet unfamiliar. He read aloud, "Monsieur Poirot, you have uncovered the truth, but have you truly solved the puzzle? The pieces are all before you, yet something remains unseen. Seek, and you shall find. But beware, for the game is not yet finished." A moment of silence passed. Hastings frowned. "Well, that's a bit unsettling. A prank, perhaps?" Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against the table. "A prank? No, Hastings. This is something else entirely." His eyes flickered with intrigue. "Mon Dieu! Could it be that we have overlooked something?" Hastings scoffed. "Come now, Poirot, you laid it all out perfectly. Danforth's motives, his deception, his guilt. What could possibly be missing?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he rose and retrieved his case notes, flipping through the details of the crime, his brow furrowing in concentration. Then, after a long moment, he murmured, "There was one thing, one tiny detail that did not fit." Hastings leaned forward. "What detail?" Poirot tapped a particular passage in his notes. "The missing watch." Hastings blinked. The missing watch. But that was never found, was it? Just so, Poirot mused. And yet it was an important part of the timeline. The watch belonged to Sir Reginald's late brother, one of his most treasured possessions. And what did we assume? That Danforth took it in his attempt to stage the crime, Hastings replied. He must have disposed of it afterward. Poirot shook his head slowly. No, Hastings, that was an assumption, and Hercule Poirot does not rely on assumptions. Hastings exhaled. All right, so the watch is still unaccounted for. But what does that mean? Danforth was guilty of the murder. That much we know. Poirot's gaze darkened. Perhaps, but perhaps he was not alone. Hastings sat up sharply. You think there was an accomplice? Poirot exhaled, his fingers steepling beneath his chin. Consider it, Hastings. The invitation to the gathering, who sent it? Well, Sir Reginald, of course. Poirot's lips pursed. No, he merely hosted. The invitations were arranged by his secretary. Hastings froze. You don't mean... Poirot's voice was quiet, measured. Miss Lillian March. Hastings' mind reeled. The secretary, efficient, unobtrusive, entirely forgettable in the grand scheme of things. But now, as he thought back, something nagged at him. She was the one who gathered the guests, the one who arranged the seating, the schedule. Poirot, are you saying she manipulated the entire evening? Poirot gave a small nod. It is a possibility, mon ami. She ensured everyone was exactly where they needed to be for Danforth's plan to unfold perfectly. But if she was involved, then why? Hastings shook his head in disbelief. But why would she send you a letter warning you that the puzzle wasn't finished? Poirot's fingers traced the edges of the mysterious envelope. Ah, Hastings, that is the most intriguing question of all. A knock at the door interrupted them. Poirot turned his head, his expression unreadable. "It seems," he murmured, "that we are about to find out." Hastings stood hesitating. "Do you want me to get it?" Poirot shook his head and moved to the door himself. With a deliberate motion, he opened it, and standing there, dressed in a dark coat, her gloved hands clutching a small velvet box, was Lillian March. For the first time in the long career of Hercule Poirot, someone unexpected had returned to the scene. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes glinting with something unreadable. "I believe we need to talk." Poirot gestured for her to enter, stepping aside. "Mademoiselle March," he said smoothly, "I have been expecting you." As she stepped inside, the case of the blood-stained invitation took an unexpected turn. One that even Poirot himself had not foreseen. The end,